How we feeling this morning? You doing okay? Hey, if we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Justin Chandler. I'm one of the pastors here at The Crossing. So glad that you're here. You're in week 3 of this series we started called God Only Knows. And as we jump into today, I'd love to ask you a question. You ever had one of those moments in your life where you ask, like, wait, what just happened? Is this moment in your life where if it were a movie, you would pause and rewind, try to retrace your steps and figure out, where did I go wrong? How did I end up here? Like, what just happened? And one of the things my wife and I were talking about this week, so kind of leading up into this weekend, is we had one of those moments early on in our dating relationship. Rachel and I, we dated long distance, and so it allowed us to, have really great phone calls and work on our communication skills, all that really great stuff. And I meant that as a positive. I know it coming out, it sounded like a negative. I really meant genuinely it allowed us to work on our communication skills. So we would have all these different talks, and so one of the rhythms we established is that every other month, we would kind of fly and visit each other, right? It helped to save costs, but then also allow us to kind of travel back and forth. And so it came my time to be able to go back and visit, and she was living out here, and so I called her and I said, hey, Rach, we have an issue. I was like, I don't have enough vacation time to be able to come and visit you again. Like, I'm really sorry. I really wanted to be able to come, but it's not going to be able to work out. And so obviously there were feelings around that. We talked about it, but she understood, right? What can you do when you don't have vacation time? And up to this point, we hadn't really had a fight yet. And so she kept having these times where she's like, I feel like we need to have a really good fight because it doesn't feel like it's a good relationship. I'm like, why are you projecting this on us? Like, why can't we just enjoy the fact that it's so easy and we love each other? Why do we have to argue about something? Let's just enjoy it. Well, it didn't take long for us to have our first fight. And so what happened is I called her and I was like pretty excited. And obviously I'm an excitable person. Like, if you ever come to like talk to me, I'm kind of like, so she was like, you seem like you're a little higher than usual. She's like, so what's happening? And I was like, well, here's the deal. I was like, my mom has this friend of hers who's a breeder. And she has this dog that I've been wanting to have like my whole life. It's a lab. It's like purebred lab by this lady. I was like, but it's not yellow. It's white. It's got this really great color. It's going to be a really awesome dog. And so I'm going to drive out to Colorado to get this dog. And so Rachel was like, how long have you been gone for? I was like, like a week or so. And so there was this pause on the other end of the phone. And I was like, uh-oh. I guess it's this moment where it's like, and at this point, Justin knew he had messed up. And so I was sitting there listening, and I was like, you still there? Like, did you drop the call? And then she was like processing. My wife's really good about that. I have a tendency to talk first and like ask questions later, but she was, processing, and she's like, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. I was like, okay, what's up? It's like, I just want to make sure I understand you that you don't have vacation time to come visit your girlfriend who, we're in a serious relationship, but you have time to go to Colorado to pick up a dog. Like, am I just understanding that correctly? And I was like, yes. And so she was like, I'm almost to work. I'm going to need to call you later. And I was like, oh, and then it's that moment where I was like, uh-oh, we got a problem. So I called my mom and I was like, hey, Mom, here's the thing. I was just wondering, I only got so much vacation time. Like, I'm really supposed to go see Rachel. You think we could flop this around and we'd be able to like have you bring the dog out and then I could go see Rachel. I want to keep my relationship. What do you think about that working out? And my mom was like, yeah, I think we can do that. That's fine, whatever. And so then Rachel calls and it's been like the whole day, right? And if the best way you're going to be able to like fight this thing out is over the phone, it's going to be really riveting. And so as we talked, she was really great, and I apologized, which is a miracle for me. And so as we like kept going, we were able to reconcile. Everything was good. But it's in that moment where there was that first pause where I went, uh-oh, we got a problem here. And maybe it's something fun and laughable like that. Oh, it's fun now, but maybe it's something fun, like you can laugh at that. But maybe there's these other moments, right, where you had the perfect job lined up, right? You were going to get a great salary, great benefits. It's the best job you've ever had. And maybe you feel like you lucked into it, right? Like you didn't have all the skills that were necessary. You kind of missed on some of the requirements. You couldn't sing, but you got the job. And you're like, this is all going to work out, right? And then something went wrong and it didn't work. Or maybe it was supposed to be the perfect relationship, right? All your friends were telling you how lucky you were. It seemed like everybody was saying like, this is perfect. Like, you guys are gonna have such a great family, you're gonna have such great kids. It's gonna be amazing. As you walked outside every day, it seemed like nature was trying to communicate to you that you were in love and it was gonna be perfect, right? But then something went wrong and it didn't work out. Or maybe it was that thing that you prayed for, and you prayed and you prayed and you prayed, and you failed and you failed and you failed. The person you were praying for didn't get better, right? The sickness continued to spread. Or maybe it was one more month where you weren't pregnant. And as adults, every one of us can say that there's been at least one moment in our life where we've said, wait, what just happened? For some of you, you need to use head, shoulder, feet, and toes to be able to count all the different moments in your life where you've paused and said, wait, what just happened? I mean, it could be similar to Stephen Carroll's experience, right? That you felt so sure about something that when you said that to another person, they weren't feeling it the same way that you were. And you thought, maybe I missed it, or maybe I was wrong. Or it took days, weeks, months, years, decades for that thing you felt to be true to finally come to pass. If you've ever struggled making sense of moments and saying, like, where is God in the midst of that? When I have that what just happened moment and I'm trying to figure out where's God in the midst of that, man, I'm so glad that you're here, because we're going to have a chance to look at one of the most integral people to faith in the entire Bible and the way that he was able to walk through that very same situation. So here's what I'd love for you to do. If you have a Bible, you can open up to Genesis chapter 40. It's the very first book in the Bible. So if you open up and turn right, you're going to make it there. If you didn't bring a Bible with you, I'd encourage you to download the YouVersion app. It's free on every device that has the internet, so you'll be able to get it there. If you want an actual Bible to hold, a paperback Bible, we have some of those out at Guest Connect. You could grab one of those. And if you're like, Justin, it's 11:48 in the morning, I'm not at all interested in any of that, we're going to put it all on the screen. You'll be able to follow along there. So as you're catching up to Genesis 40, here's a little bit of the story we've been in. In the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about this guy named Joseph. And here's Joseph's story. He was born into a family called Israel. That's his dad's name, which may be confusing for you because most of us know Israel as the country. And so Israel, the country, is named after this guy, and his original name was Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons. Joseph was one of the youngest sons in the family. And so one of the unique things that happened to Joseph is he had these two dreams. And in these two dreams, he dreamed that his father, mother, and brothers all bowed down to him in this dream. So everyone who's listening is going, you're going to be the one who rules over us? Like, you're one of the youngest ones here, right? So they have that. If you match it with the extravagant gifts that Joseph received from his dad, and if you match it with the preferential treatment, like, it doesn't take long for you to know family dynamics to go, this isn't going to go well. And so what the older brothers decided to do is that they were going to murder Joseph, right? So if you've got family problems, you're already a step ahead, right? So Joseph is going to get killed by his brothers. And one of the brothers says, let's not kill him. Let's throw him in a pit. Right? So they throw him into this really big pit, and then some slave traders come by, and he says, ooh, we had an idea. What if we sell him into slavery and we can all make some money on it, and at least we didn't kill him? Again, I don't know your family issues, but I doubt it's this. So they sell Joseph into slavery, and then they pretend with their father that he got murdered by a wild animal. Right? So there's week number 1 of our series. So as Joseph is sold into slavery, he makes it to Egypt, and he gets sold to this guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar is the captain of the guard, which means he's the ruler of the royal prison. So anybody who offended Pharaoh is going to end up in this prison. So Potiphar manages that. And now Joseph is his slave. Now, you might have fallen asleep in world history class, right? Or it might have been a couple of decades since you were in there, but you've seen enough movies to recognize Egyptian history, right? They had 3,000 years where they were the most powerful empire in all of the world. And so Joseph gets working for Potiphar. And what's incredible about this moment is he starts having all kinds of success. Not only does he succeed, but because he's succeeding, Potiphar succeeds. And Potiphar decides, like, I'm not going to manage anything in my own house anymore. I'm going to let you do everything for me except decide what I eat. And so Joseph and Potiphar rule side by side. Everything's going great. But what's true about success then and true about success now is it doesn't take long for people to notice. And one of the people who noticed Joseph was Potiphar's wife. And Potiphar's wife noticed that Joseph was well-built and handsome. That's included in your Bible. And so she made very aggressive language to him, and the most aggressive language she could communicate, to say, come to bed with me. And so Joseph does the upright, moral thing and says he's not going to go to bed with her. He's actually going to run and flee. But the problem for Joseph is that she had his shirt. And so what she does is she goes to her husband, right, the ruler of prison, and says to him, look what this slave has done. He's tried to shame and humiliate and sexually assault me. And what are you going to do about it? So you could only imagine what a tenured prison leader would do in responding to this injustice. And here's what happened in Genesis 39, verse 20. It says, Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, Joseph didn't just go to jail. right? He didn't do some bid in county. Like Joseph is doing real federal time right now, right? So he is in prison. And as he's in prison, he's got this moment where he had to ask, what just happened? Because it felt like he was on the up and up with Potiphar, right? Like he's in a really powerful kingdom. He's got a really powerful boss. Everything is going great. And then now he's in prison. And he's not in prison because he did something wrong. Joseph's in prison because he did everything right. And so now he's got to be at this point where he's like throwing his hands up in the air saying, I don't understand anymore. That he guessed he was wrong, like he must have missed it. Surely this was one of those moments where he didn't quite understand what God was doing. And maybe that's been true for you. Maybe there's been some moments in your life where you felt like you were on it, like you felt like you knew what was happening, and then something in life happened that caused you to be way on the other side, and you said, I don't understand what's going on. And Joseph's not being a pessimist, right, in him giving up or him losing sight of something. He's being a realist. Like, how in the world are his mother, father, and brothers going to end up in prison and say, oh yeah, now you're the boss? Like, that's not the way that this dream was supposed to play out. But I want to show you something really interesting about Joseph, something that's been really special for him. And it's something that shows up in the next verses after it. Here's what it says. It says that while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. While Joseph was in prison, God was with him. And sometimes in negative circumstances, we'll be able to say, like, God's not with me here, or surely God abandoned me. But what the Bible is making a special emphasis in is saying that while he was in prison, while he was losing sight of the dream, while he wasn't sure of how it was going to work out, God was with him. So God was with Joseph in the same way in prison, and the way he was with Joseph when he was successful and working for Potiphar. Because here's what verse 2 of that same chapter said. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. The Lord was with Joseph. And now we find ourselves here. Joseph's in prison, where dreams go to die, and where dreamers are forgotten. God only knows how this dream is going to work out, and God only knows how Joseph's going to get out of here. But as we've seen in our life, and as we've seen throughout this series, there's going to be moments in our life where the sorrow of our life is going to press us like we're in a pit. And there's going to be moments where temptation chases us and finds us, like when he was in Potiphar's house. But we also find there's going to be moments for you and I where it feels like life has us in a prison and we have no idea how to get out. And so we're going to jump into Genesis chapter 48, and we'll get after it. We're going to start in verse number 1. So if you've got your Bible ready, here's where we'll start. So sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended to them. So as Joseph's doing time in prison, two of Pharaoh's officials offend him, and they end up in prison with Joseph, right? So you may not know what a cupbearer and a baker are, but here's kind of their role in the kingdom, right? So the cupbearer's role is he brings drinks to Pharaoh. But as he brings drinks to Pharaoh, you can imagine with someone in power, there's going to be a lot of people trying to kill him. And so what the cupbearer would do is they would drink the drink first. So if anyone was trying to poison Pharaoh, they would die instead of him. Great job, right? And then the next guy is the baker. And in the same way that someone would try to poison by drink, people would try to poison by food. So the baker would bring out food, and in case someone was trying to poison the king by food, he would eat the food first, and if he died, Pharaoh wouldn't eat it. So in some way, they both offended Pharaoh. Maybe they said, I'm not eating that, and then that was the end of them, right? So then they end up in prison, and here they are with Joseph. And Joseph has turned from a dreamer to slave, to executive assistant, to prisoner, and now he attends to prisoners in jail. Right? So he's not just a prisoner, he's taking care of other prisoners. And I want you to imagine how far away the dream must have felt now. Like how far away this moment of what he felt like his purpose in life was, how far away that must feel. And yet God has this incredible way of showing up in circumstances where we feel like no one can see us, where we feel forgotten, or where we feel like there's no way that this is ever going to work out. God has an incredible way of showing up there. And here's how it happened for Joseph. It says that after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." So imagine being Joseph when this happens, right? You're working for these guys, you're attending to other prisoners, and you see two prisoners who are sad. Now, I've never been to a prison, but I'm sure in prison, there's a number of things that you could be sad about, right? It's prison, right? That's kind of like the whole point of prison. And so you can imagine these guys have a lot of things that could have been sadder, issues that they could have. And so Joseph asked them the question, "Why are you sad?" And they say to him, "We had a dream." And no one knows what the dream means. Now, if you're Joseph, like this has to make you go, "This is my moment," right? Because you're like, "I had a dream. They had a dream. Like, this is my comeback story. This is gonna be how it all works out." And so Joseph does the way the story would assume that he would in verse number 8. Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." And so here's the dreams they have. The cupbearer has this dream, and so as he starts talking through all these different details, Joseph says to him, "All right, man, here's the interpretation." He's like, "In a couple of days, you're gonna get out of prison. And when you get out of prison, Pharaoh's actually gonna promote you back to your position, and so you're not gonna be in prison anymore," right? That's a great dream. You're like, "Yeah, I love that interpretation." So the baker hears that, and he's like, "My man's on a roll. Let me tell you what my dream was." And so he goes on to tell him his dream, and Joseph is like, "So here's your dream. In a couple of days, you're gonna get out of prison, and then you're gonna die." And so this guy had to be like, "What does this guy even know," right? He's in prison, he works for us, like, "You're not a dream interpreter." And so they all go out. So here's how Joseph continues with the cupbearer. He looks right at him in verse 14 and says this. He says, "When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." So 3 days later, Pharaoh has a party. He invites all of his chief officials there. And so he says to the cupbearer and the baker, he brings them out of prison. And he says to the cupbearer, like, "So glad for your service. You're coming back. You don't have to be in prison anymore," right? Woohoo! And then he says to the baker, "You're dead," right? So then that guy gets killed. And so you have to imagine that Joseph hears that news, right? He told these guys these things. And so you have to imagine that news made it back to him. And so Joseph has got to be packing his bags. He's like, "I got my boy, the cupbearer. He's right next to Pharaoh. He's going to tell him, I got this guy in prison. He's locked up. You got to get that guy out of there. He's a good guy. And then I'm going to get out." So Joseph is getting ready. But here's something that happens in verse 23. It says, "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." So if the assault and attempted murder by his brother wasn't enough, if being sold into slavery to Potiphar wasn't enough, if having a false accusation being rendered against you and you being put into prison wasn't enough, man, this has to be it. Because there's something that happens when you lose hope, but then all of a sudden hope comes back a little bit. Like you start to allow yourself to dream again. You allow yourself to hope again. There starts to be this, maybe this could be the moment, and then all of a sudden it gets slammed down again. Like that is the time where you say, "I will never, ever do this again." And maybe that's been true with you for faith. Like maybe that's part of the struggle for you because you felt like certain things have been true and yet it felt like life has just crushed this thing completely. But here's what I love about God. And here's why I love that you're here today. Is because when God makes a promise, he fulfills it. That God's not like you and me that he needs to lie or trick in order to get his way. He doesn't have to start doing little things in order to convince us to make decisions and then he can be like, "Ha, gotcha." Like that is not the way that God operates. So when God says something to us, it doesn't matter what's happening in our lives or to us, that God is going to fulfill everything he says, even when it seems like the cards are stacked against us, right? God only knows how it's gonna work out, but God never, ever, ever forgets because he's a way maker and a miracle worker. He's a promise keeper and the light in the darkness. Even when we can't see it, God's working. Even when we can't feel it, God's working. God, when he promises, never stops working. It's true for Joseph and it's true for you and I. And as we turn the chapter in this story, it's also where Joseph's life takes a turn. And so here's how it starts in chapter 41. That when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Now, as the reader, we go, "Oh," like this is a moment, right? Joseph's ignorant. Joseph's in prison, forgotten, denied by his boy, and he's just figuring this is the way my life is gonna play out. But then for us, we start to say, something's happening now. And in the same way, Joseph's dream in prison reminded him for the cupbearer and the baker. This moment reminds the cupbearer. So here's what happens in verse 9. It says that the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us." And this is the moment that we've been waiting for, that as we've been reading this story, this is the thing where we start to see how God is starting to work this out. When God only knows how Joseph's going to get out of there, God only knows how he's going to fulfill this purpose and this dream, this is where we start to see the pass a line. Again, Joseph being completely ignorant to it. And so in verse 14, it says that Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. So I want you to imagine being Joseph and sitting in prison, right, feeling like this is the end. This is how his life comes to an end. All of the opportunities you felt like it was going to work out, they've all come to a close. And then someone walks up to you and says, "Pharaoh wants to see you, the most powerful man in the world." Now, you've been in prison for a while now, right? And it's not like modern prison for us, right? He probably hadn't had a shower for a while, hadn't had a shave in a minute. So they have to go take him and get him cleaned up. He gets fresh clothes, he gets a fresh cut. And so he goes in to see Pharaoh, having spent years in prison. Now, he knows from the cupbearer and the baker, there's one of two ways this conversation is going to go. Like either he's going to live or he's going to get killed, right? So here's the very first words he hears when he meets with Pharaoh. It's verse 15. Pharaoh says to him, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Now, when Joseph first had a dream, his brothers used to say to him, "There goes the dreamer." And the very same thing that people used to mock him about is now the entire reason why he's standing in front of the most powerful man in the world. The thing that used to make him the joke is now the thing that's going to be able to fulfill that promise. And as he stands in front of Pharaoh, like he could have had a number of ways to react, right? He could have got like really proud and arrogant about it. It's like, "Yeah, man, I do good work with dreams. Like I'm your guy. Like I promise you I'm going to come through on this. Like I'm batting 1,000 right now. I am the dream guy." He could be that, right? He could try to defer it and say like, I don't want to put too much stock in that because if it doesn't go right, like I don't want to try to get killed about it. But here's what he says in verse 16. He says, "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." And so Pharaoh goes on to tell Joseph his dreams. And so here's Pharaoh's dreams. He's got this one dream where there's 7 cows. And these 7 cows get huge, like these big, massive, awesome cows, right? I don't know a lot about cows, but they're great cows, right? So he starts to have this really great cow encounter. And then what happens is these really sick, nasty cows show up, right? Thin, gross-looking, diseased cows. And those cows eat the really healthy cows. Right? So you're like, dream number 1. And then he says, here's dream 2. I had a dream that there was these grains, like really big, huge grains, awesome grains, beautiful grains, all that good stuff. He's like, and then these really sick, nasty grains came out, right? Like they were all gross looking, and then they got burnt by the sun, and then the sick grains ate the really healthy grains. And so I'm thinking what you're thinking. And that's not a dream. Like that's a nightmare, right? That's the stuff you wake up in a cold sweat about. And so he says to Joseph, "What do you think about my dreams?" And so Joseph says to him, he's like, "All right, here's the interpretation." He's like, "There's going to be 7 years in Egypt that are going to be unbelievable abundance. There's going to be so much money, so much prosperity, so much stuff. It's going to be the greatest years in Egyptian history." He's like, "But what's going to happen after that is there's going to be 7 awful years. 7 years of recession, depression, and famine. And those bad years are going to be so bad that no one's going to remember the good years anymore." And so Joseph says to him, "Here's what you should do. In the really, really good years, start setting aside extra, right? Just start storing it away. And then when the bad years come, you're going to have enough to be able to give back to people. And not only is your nation going to survive, you'll survive and you'll make it out of the bad years if you store away during the good years." So this little meeting has turned from dream interpreter to kingdom advisor, to the most powerful man in the world. Now that's some serious boldness from your boy who was just in prison, right? So as he starts to say it, again, there's one of 2 ways this is gonna play. Like, who are you to tell me what to do? Dead, right? Or there could be something else. So here's what verse 37 says. Here's Pharaoh's reaction. "The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." And this is where we say, what just happened? I mean, he was just locked up in jail doing his bid, and then all of a sudden, he's the second most powerful man in the world. Like, Pharaoh could have made him an accountant. He could have made him a food advisor and manager. There's a lot of positions between prison and number two, and now he's the second most powerful man in the world. I mean, what was Potiphar's wife thinking when all this went down? Ooh, right? But then like, all of this starts to play out, and here's him in charge of the kingdom. And what's incredible about the circumstances for Joseph is what we see when this story first began. And maybe if we miss on the details, we'll miss some of these little moments. Here's Genesis 37. Joseph, a young man of 17, had a dream. And here's what we read just a couple of verses after we just read. It says, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph was 17 when all this started. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. And he was 30 before he got out of prison. That's 13 years of him asking the question, wait, what just happened? And what we know from the story is it's gonna be at least 7 years after that before the dream Joseph had is gonna be fulfilled, which is why I'm so excited for you to be here next week. You're not only gonna get to see the dream fulfilled, you're gonna get to see how Joseph reacts to it. It's a really incredible ending to the story. But what's amazing about this is there is a 20-year gap between what God said to Joseph in the very beginning and when that thing actually gets fulfilled. And at any step along the way, Joseph could have quit. At any step, he could have just said, it's not working out, it's not happening anymore, the dream is over. And yet God used every one of those steps for this dream to be true. It took Joseph having a dream for his life and his purpose to be discovered. It took Joseph ending up in a pit for his life to be spared. As Joseph cried for help and no one answered, it took Joseph being sold into slavery. It took Joseph being a slave for him to make it to Potiphar. It took Joseph avoiding temptation and being falsely imprisoned in Pharaoh's dungeon. It took Joseph interpreting a dream from a cupbearer he was attending to. It took Pharaoh having a dream for the cupbearer to be reminded. It took Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream for him to be free. And it's in Joseph's freedom that he will fulfill his dream. And in fulfilling his dream, Joseph is gonna save not only his family, but he's gonna save the world. And he could have said, where are you, God? Why aren't you listening anymore? Why aren't you hearing me? Why have you stopped working? Why isn't this going the way you said it would? And yet every one of those things were necessary to get Joseph to where he needed to be in order to fulfill what he's supposed to be. So the question I have for you today is, what about you? Maybe there's been moments where you've said, what is happening? And maybe head, shoulders, feet, and toes could count all of the different ways where you felt like life didn't turn out the way it was supposed to. The dream's not there anymore. It's all done. And maybe you're just finding yourself in this moment where you're existing. And the thing we have to be careful about is when we go to existing, there's gonna come a moment at the end of each one of our lives that we're gonna get to the end and we're gonna ask the question, what just happened? What happened to the dream I had when I was a kid? Or the dream that I believed when I was a teenager, what was true in my 20s and 30s, and then we'll find ourselves at the end having none of that been true and ask the question, what just happened? And your life, one of the things I've learned, will either be a prison you live in or it'll be a platform that you stand on. And you and I have a choice about that. It's what we've been singing all month in this brand new song, that even when we can't see it, even when we can't feel it, God is moving. And I felt like my sole purpose in this weekend, and one of my sole purposes in saying to you, is that God is with you. And he hasn't left you. And I don't need to know your circumstances. I don't need to know all the different details about what it is. I am here to tell you, God is with you. And one of my favorite verses in all of the Bible says it like this, in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. It says, whether you walk to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. And one of Jesus' last words were in Matthew 28:20. And he says, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. See, I don't have to bring a lot of hope. I don't have to bring a lot of I wish that this would be true. The promise of the Bible and the promise from Jesus is that God is with you. And as we say yes to him and as we trust him, all of the things of our life, God is aligning and working together, not only for our good, but for all of the good that he purposed in our life from the very beginning. And so for each one of us, there's a number of ways that we could respond into today. We could start to go through the list of all the places where we could say, what just happened? Or maybe we could have this moment where we say yes and we trust in a brand new way. And so here's some of the ways that I want to invite you to be able to say yes. For some of you, the way for you to say yes today is to say yes to Jesus, right? That there could be this voice in your head, voice in your soul, a lot of what Steve described, and you don't know how to make sense of it, but you know it's not you talking to you, right? Because you're not crazy, and you're saying something is happening, and I want to try to make sense of that, right? To be able to say yes to Jesus. Some of you, you're coming back today because you left faith a long time ago. And you just kind of push that to the side. But life has worked out in a way that you're back because you're trying to figure out what else to do, and you don't know where else to go. And maybe this could be the moment where you're saying yes to Jesus, and you're saying yes again, you're coming back into that relationship. For some of you, you had a dream, and you gave up on that dream. Any number of years, weeks, months ago that you gave up on it. But as I started talking today and started to remember the dream, that thing in your brain started going off again. And you're remembering what you felt like was true of your life from the beginning. And maybe this is your chance of saying, God, I don't know how you're going to work this all out. I don't know. God only knows how this is going to play, but I know that I can trust you. And for some of you, you feel like you're living in a prison. It could be addiction. It could be circumstances. It could be emotional, physical. But you feel like your soul is in a prison. And today, I believe that Jesus wants to set you free. And then we're going to take some time to be able to say yes to that. So can we do this as we close out today? Can we all stand up to our feet together? And I'm going to invite you to bow your head and close your eyes, not because there's something magical about bowing your head and closing your eyes, but it just gives you a chance to pause and reflect, all right? Nothing weird is going to happen right now. At least it's not supposed to. If something weird happens with your neighbor, that's on them, right? But I just want you to bow your head and close your eyes, and we're just going to take a moment kind of to reflect before we get out of here today. And so here's what I'd love for you to do. If you're in the room today, maybe you're outside, you're watching online, and you want to say yes to Jesus, right? And you're saying yes either for the first time, or maybe you're saying yes to faith and you're returning to faith. But you're starting it up as if it's fresh and new today. Could you do me a favor? Could you lift your hand up real high? Because I want to be able to pray for you. So if you're saying yes to Jesus either for the first time or today you're making a comeback to faith, could you lift your hand up? Wow, that's so incredible. Yeah, thank you so much. The dozens of hands that are up in here. I'm just going to pause real quick. When you walked in, you got this program. You might have denied the program on the way in, but inside there's this little say yes card, right? It's a way for you to fill out your contact information. And the very top box and it says, I said yes to Jesus today. And here's what I want you to know. This moment is so meaningful that we started this church 30 years ago for the sole purpose of you to be able to have the moment you just had. It's the whole reason why we do what we do. And I want you to know the power of this moment for us as a church. We celebrate this and we love this so much. But I want you to know the power of this moment for me. That 20 years ago, I said yes to Jesus for the first time, and I don't even know what I was saying yes to. And that one decision has transformed my entire life. And so here's what I'd love for you to do. I know it's weird, write it down and fill it out. I want to call you this week and have a chance to follow up with you in the same way that someone followed up with me. And I want to help talk you through what this relationship with Jesus looks like. And I believe God is going to use that to absolutely transform your life. So before you get out of here today, could you fill that out? One of our hosts will take it on the way out. You could drop it at Guest Connect, but I'd love to call you this week. All right, to the second crew of people, if you've given up on a dream, there was something in your heart that was so real, but it feels like a distant memory, but now all of a sudden it's starting to come back to you again. Could you lift your hand up real high because I want to pray for you? So if there's a dream in your heart and soul that you've given up on, could you lift it up? Yeah, thanks so much for lifting your hands. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, and to the last group of people, if you feel like you're in a prison, right? It could be physical, emotional, it could be addiction, but you're like, I feel like my soul is locked up right now and I want to be free today. Could you lift your hand up real high too? Because I want to pray for you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for lifting your hands up. All right, let's pray together. Jesus, I love you so much, and I'm so thankful for today. I'm so thankful, God, that as you create and you make us, you don't just leave us alone. You just didn't form us and say, do what you're going to do, but God, you're with us. You are the one who speaks to us and says, this is the way, walk in it. And for so many people, God, they took their step into the way that you're inviting them to. For some people, they said yes to you for the very first time today, Jesus, that they trusted and believed in you, the God of the universe who saved their soul. And I pray today, God, that this just wasn't a moment or a time for us to say yes, but God, this is where all of heaven entered here into earth and it touched the human heart. And so I pray, Jesus, as you're the Savior of the world, God, would you do the work of saving so many different people here today? God, for some people, there's been a dream that they've given up on. Something that just because of life and circumstances and these what just happened moments, God, that they've let that go to the side. But I pray, Jesus, as you're the one who gives dreams, would you call them back to life? And God, would you remind us that when you speak it, and if you spoke that dream into existence, you're going to fulfill what you promised. And so, God, I pray that hope would rise yet again as you cause the dreamers to dream again. And God, for those of us living in a prison, and it feels like our soul is trapped physically, emotionally, spiritually by addiction. God, I pray in the same way that you walked out of the tomb alive and you broke all of the chains of death, hell, and the grave, God, would you break the chains of our soul that are holding us bound? And that, God, if you could walk out of the tomb alive, then any of the things we're going through in our life are nothing for you. And so I pray this moment and this trust would allow you, God, to display your unbelievable power in our lives. And Jesus, as we leave, would we be able to hold to your promise that as you resurrected from the dead, you said that you're with us always, even to the end of the age. And I pray that the power and the presence of God would accompany us today. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. We love you guys so much. Thanks for being here this weekend, and we'll see you next week.